But what year did you buy the property?
1943. I'll always remember that.
Now, how did you get here? From where where were you living, in Vancouver?
Vancouver.
And how did you get out here?
We had a car, and it was during wartime, and it was gas rationing, so we saved our gas to come out here for the weekend, and we rode the interurban cars into town to work. The interurbans are gone. The one we rode was a block away from our house, and was the New Westminster line. The station was Abbott and Hastings, which is now gone, and Ed worked for the government on Burrard Street, Burrard and Hastings, and the Federal Building, and I worked now another Cannery Row, where they have these wonderful artists' apartments on there on Hamilton. Well, I worked on Hamilton Street in one of those things. I worked for Vancouver Pacific Paper, wholesale paper place. And we had they had the whole building. And now, of course, it's all fancy.
It's a Tony place to live.
Yeah, it is.
Now, so to come here, you went over the Petula Bridge, down the King George Highway.
Right. And then we came, well, as a matter of fact, we never came directly here because his parents lived in White Rock. His parents were retired. They retired to White Rock in 1936 because they used to come and spend their holidays here in the 20s, the whole family, you see. And so we came, Johnson Road was there. So when you came to the King George Highway, we turned off to go to Johnson Road, and then we went down right to Buena Vista, down the hill, and they lived right on, what is the name of that street? It's 1 block long.
I don't know.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a block from Marine Drive. Wonderful soil. They had 2 big lots there, and his father was a gardener, of course, vegetables like you wouldn't believe.
So
we stayed with them for the weekend or whatever. And that's how we went. Then to come here, we would go Campbell River Road and up the Meridian.
Okay. And what was the first thing you did here?
Fight our way in over the, over the nettles. It was a nettle bush. No, we surveyed it ourselves. As a matter of fact, we happened to come down the Coast Meridian when we had been scouting the area for land because we wanted to have acreage. We looked on the Panorama Ridge, and the view was beautiful, but it was too stony. We went down where that wind place is now Nickel Wind, and we looked at acreage there, but it had no view, but sometimes it was underwater, and we didn't like that. We wanted to plant trees, you see. So we just happened to come down Meridian, and it was dusk, and it was beautiful. And we said, how did we ever miss this, you know? So we just slowly came down, and we saw this particular area, which had the trees on it, and a little old house, which is now gone, but there is a house across the street, which is still there. And we knocked, or at least Ed did. He went in there, knocked, and wanted to know whose property this was. Was it for sale? And the lady, Mrs. Smith, she said yes, it was for sale. And she hesitated. And later on we found out why. Because she didn't want it sold. She was running her pigs on it. And if it was sold, she couldn't have it anymore, you see. However, she told us which real estate company was had it for sale, and we called on them, and it was owned by a Mr. Winters, who was an old gentleman, and he was just selling off all his property in Canada. He owned the Winters Hotel on Cordova Street. In that area there. It was an old timer. He was an old timer too. However, he was from the Seattle area, so he went back there to live And no, he didn't want to sell us 5 or 10 acres. He had 50 acres, and we'd have to buy the lot or nothing. And we didn't have that kind of money, believe you me. We didn't even have money for 15 acres, let alone 50 acres. So anyway, we bought it. And then we had to figure out what to do with it, how to do it, and got a surveyor, which was tough in that time because most of the surveyors were working for the army, no matter what the age, you see, to whatever they were doing. But this one, it was getting onto winter time, and this one was off for the winter, and it was an older man, and he said, well, yeah, he might be interested. So we took him out to see it, and yes, he was interested. So he surveyed the property next to us, and next to that, and next to that. And that was those 3 lots were anyway, one was 7-point-something acres and 8-point-something acres, and we kept 13.5 acres ourselves on this piece right here, which we figured was pretty good. So,
when did you build the house?
The house was built after we had done some clearing, because we couldn't build because there was no water and there was no light, and of course there was no telephone. And in those days, to build, you had to have water, because your cement was made right on the property. There's no big truck to come down there and pour it for you. You did it right here. So we had to have water, so we had to get a man to witch the well for us, and he was kind of a joke because he came and he said, oh, he was exhausted, oh, this, and we found out with the man waking, he's wanting a drink. So we poured water, and it wasn't water, we poured liquor into him, and he found a place for us. And yes, we got a well driller, and he went down 125 feet, and we had water, and then we had to dig a ditch and pipe it. When I helped. I mean, I'm a great digger, and and we dug that. But then in those days too, lumber was very scarce because everything was for the war effort, you see. But working for the government and examining people's books always aids you in finding what you want. So we, I shouldn't say we, because I had nothing to do with it. Ed did. He found somebody who had some lumber, and he was surveying or whatever they call it, a lumber yard or roofing, or you name it, and we managed. And we had to, one of the first things we had to do was build a road in to make the house. And we had a friend who was who drew up the plans for us, and he was a contractor, although he didn't contract. Ed did his own contracting, but he looked over the property, and we were thinking of building by the road, and he says, no, what you want to do is build where we are now. But you couldn't, of course, because the hill went in around that way. And he said, get a bulldozer and have them fill in that particular area that is below the natural rise of the land. And we did that. And we're about, let me see, about this 3 feet in some spots to 10 feet in other spots. And that filled in, and that's how we got the road built. And then he got a bulldozer to dig out the basement. And we had to get somebody to do the cement work and so on. And that's where the water came into it, you see. So it would be, we bought it in 43. We started cleaning out the land and burning and blasting in 44 and 45. Oh, 46. Because we moved in, I would say, at the end of 47, because the house wasn't finished yet. But in those days, you didn't ask permission; you just came in, and it had, shiplap. The base. We lived in the basement. It had a fireplace, and shiplap on the stairs. No railing, no anything. We didn't mind. So.
What did you plant first? Well, before I ask you that, who did the blasting?
Oh, we did. We did. They were huge stumps, of course. You've seen pictures of them, I'm sure. And he would dig a tunnel, shall we say, underneath it, so that he could crawl in there. And then I would hand him the sticks of powder, and then he would come out with a line, and you'd light it, and then you'd start hollering, "Fire!" And you'd hear that all over the neighborhood, because we weren't the only ones that were clearing land. We were not the only ones that had stumps. But what used to scare me was when he'd say, "Oh, I think I need another 5 sticks." And I'd say, "I hope you know what you're doing. I hope you know what you're doing," because this was new to him, new to me. And he didn't know much about blasting either, for that matter. But that's how we blasted them. Yeah. And then, you know, the stumps, when you do that in the middle, they just go woof and break apart. And then, of course, you have to have a saw and saw them into pieces and have your huge fires. And
yeah,
just the two of us.
Yeah. What did you plant first? I know you had an orchard.
Fruit trees.
Fruit trees.
Fruit trees, yes. That's what we wanted to do, you see. We had, we did research on what we wanted, and we wanted Italian prunes, and we got 300 of them.
Trees?
We got them from
300 trees?
Trees, oh yes. And then we decided we'd go to all these lectures in town about fruit and this and that that the government had, and we had Gravenstein apples, and I've forgotten what apples we had. We had 50 apple trees anyway. We had pear trees, we had cherry trees, we had apricot trees, we had peach trees. You name it, we had it.
Well, how did you make the transition from simply having an orchard to what you have now?
Well, that was gradual. How did that happen? The beginning actually was joining the Alpine Garden Club of British Columbia, which sounds strange because I'm not that interested in alpines, you see. But I happened to be, we were great goers of the P&E, and the P&E was something in those days, nothing like it is now. And
doesn't exist.
But there was a display there by a horticultural society. I couldn't tell you whose now, but they were displaying a big batch of penstemons. You know penstemons? Well, these were the shrubby penstemons, and at the time I was very interested in penstemons as shrubs, and so I asked who had entered them, and oh, they came from the Alpine Garden Club of British Columbia. So that intrigued me, and I found out who they were, and I joined them. Now, the Alpine Garden Club of British Columbia is the most knowledgeable club in British Columbia. You know, they've got rhododendron societies and this, that, and the other thing. When they talk plants, they talk Latin. You learn, and I knew nothing about horticulture. Oh, you know how to plant, what do you call it, annuals and stuff like that. Everybody had those, or geraniums, or what have you. But that's where I learned what horticulture was all about, because they weren't only, there were a lot of the old-timers there, and now too, but the old-timers, they were knowledgeable about plants of whatever variety, about trees, about shrubs, about you name it, but they were intensely interested in the alpines. And that is what started me on knowing about all these plants that you can grow. It opens your eyes, shall we say.
You got a lot of seeds from Kew Gardens, though.
Oh yes.
And yes. a lot of what we see in the garden was grown from seed, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Well, part of that was after the Alpine Garden Club, and how he got involved in this, I don't know, but there was a meeting to start a and it was sort of the forerunner of all the garden clubs that are together now, and how he got involved I couldn't tell you, but he said that one of the men there was a little old English gardener. That was his profession, and he wanted to start a judging class, and he wanted me to, or Ed wanted me to join that, and I said, I don't want to know anything about, I want to know about plants. I don't care about judging them and so on and so forth. And he said, well, you'd learn a lot. And so finally he convinced me. Well, he was right. I still judge plants at all the shows. I've judged at the Peony. I've judged all over. And that was through this little Englishman who worked at that time for Mackenzie's estate on Southwest Marine Drive. They had 5 acres and he was their gardener. And once a month we went there, and he had a table laid out. If it was, say, roses, it was roses. If it was a month for tulips, daffodils, you name it. And we had to judge them, and then he told us what we should have been looking for, what they should be like, and so on and so forth.
We were talking about the gold prize.
The gold, yes. Well, we had, as I said, Italian prunes, green gauge plums, you know, 3 different kind of prunes. We had apples, we had, I don't think we had any cherries, medlars.
What are medlars?
Grapes. Oh, Mispla germanica. It's a medieval tree, which I brought it at one of the meetings and it splattered all over. Anyway, whatever fruit he had, and he had a 15 display all laid up, beautifully laid out, and that was done the night before, and very early in the morning I went to town with him for shopping probably, and he was going to work, but we left very early so that we could see them judging. You see, it was in where they play hockey, or where they used to play hockey. And we watched them for a while, and they were in front of this display. There were 3 judges and the stewards and everything, and they were waving their arms and talking. And I said, Ed, we've done something wrong. We must have got away from the schedule. You know, you're supposed to go according to the schedule. However, there was nothing we could do about it, and he had to go to work, so we went to work. So later on, after work, we went to see what had finally happened, and here he had a gold medal for the only one that the Peony has ever given out to expeditions.
Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and that's how he got that.
What year was that?
67, I think, but the year is on that.
Okay.
But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
So he was very proud of that. He should be too, because you see, it's not only a matter of picking the fruit off the tree. Like with prunes, you've got to leave the bloom on, so you've got to do this so gently. You've got to have a tissue and look all over your fruit to get the most perfect one, and then gently with your tissue get it off so that all the bloom is still on the fruit. And they had grapes. We had this grape, and we had 2 other kinds of grapes. We picked blackberries, the blackberry, which were wild, but we put those in too. Oh, it was marvelous. It really was a very good display.
Now,
but, yeah.
Let me just change the subject. For future generations, or in fact, many people today, a park is a park. A park has trees, grass, benches, flowers, shrubs, and the parks around here are Redwood Park, Crescent Park. If you were to try to explain to a person with that kind of limited background how your garden differs from all those other parks, how would you do that? What's special about yours?
Well, because it's plantsman's park. And by plantsman, I mean someone who is interested intensely interested in not only the trees and the shrubs, but the perennials, but the alpines, even a few annuals thrown in, bulbs as well, and who is so intensely interested they will go to the trouble to get these, or try to get these plants from seed, because they're not available locally. They're sometimes not available in the whole country. And you then start to look for associations, clubs, groups who are interested in that too. One of them, of course, is the Royal Horticultural Society, which in those days you had to get a sponsor to join, and that's where my little gardening Englishman came in, because he was a member and he took a great fancy to me, fortunately, and he sponsored me as a member of the Royal Horticultural Society. And in those days you were able to get, they send you a seed list at the end of the year, and you were able to get, I think it's 80 packages of seed, free, for your, and it was wonderful. It's like a gift out of heaven. And that I did. In those days also, the Alpine Garden Club got into the seed business, shall we say, and that is why they have a membership that is worldwide. They have members in New Zealand, in France, and you name it. And these people were, when our seed list came out, were able to get seeds free too, 80 packages of seeds. For their appreciation, mind you, you have to be a member of the club, but for their appreciation, these people started to send us seeds from German, well, yeah, not East Germany, but West Germany, from France, from the Scandinavian countries, from England, you name it. And then, by word of mouth, the people from the countries behind the Iron Curtain got interested too. You know, word of mouth gets around, and we'd get word from somebody who had a friend in Czechoslovakia. How could they get our seed, you know, because they're not able to send money out. So club members sponsored them. We had Russian members, we had Czechoslovakian members, we had East German members, and you wouldn't believe the wonderful seed we got out of those people without asking. In gratitude, they sent us seed for the exchange, which then goes out all over the world. And it's still doing that. We, at the beginning, we only used seeds from our own people of North and South American seeds. But now you can get seeds from all over the world because they were inundated with seed, you see. Now that's how the Alpine Garden Club entered my life. Then there was the Rhododendron Society, and we have a great many rhododendrons on the grounds. And that began because I wasn't interested in rhododendrons, period. You know, great big thing. Once the bloom's got, you've got a laurel bush, almost, you know. So that the little Englishman asked me to come and help him judge the first rhododendron show that they were holding out in Burnaby. I said, I know nothing about it. And he said, you come along. So I did. And there, I fell in love with rhododendrons. Not because of their show, but the UBC Botanical Garden had put in a display of species rhododendrons. And there I saw the leaves, the gorgeous indimentum at the back, narrow leaves, curly leaves, you name it. I loved every one of them. You think I was nuts when I'm talking about leaves with such enthusiasm. But people, you know, you have a flower for how long? Yeah. You've got the rest of the bush for the rest of the time. Why not have something that interests both? Mm-hmm. So then I joined the Rhododendron Society and found out they weren't really interested in species. They were only interested in hybridizing. But, you know, one thing leads to the other. I've never hybridized, but I still collect species. And I like the dwarf ones, you know, the ones that come from high up and it'll take full sun and cold weather and stuff like that.
How would you compare this garden to the two, well, yeah, the two better-known gardens in the Lower Mainland?
Better-known gardens?
Well, I'm speaking of Van Dusen and
well,
Botanical Gardens. I mean, I know they cover something like 1,000 acres.
Thanks for putting me in the same category, because that's a wonderful compliment. But I mean, they have staff, they can get plants from all over the world. They think they have no money, but they can still afford plants. They should be so without money as I am, and want plants, you know.
Yeah.
No, they, and then there's the UBC Botanical Garden, and they do wonderful things there. But I'll tell you, my garden is a home garden enlarged. And when people come to see my garden, they feel more at home because they look at it and say, gee, I could grow that, or I could do that. Whereas if they go to Van Dusen, there's no way they can have a Van Dusen, no way can have a UBC Botanical Garden, you see. But with me, they think, oh, I could do that too, you see. And not only that, I'm not laid out like they are too, although I do have labels. And that wasn't done for the public, that was done for me, because my memory is short sometimes. Sometimes I remember everything, and other days I can look at the dandelion and not know its name. That's...
Yeah, well, are there certain things in the garden that are your favorites? Certain plants or trees?
That I which?
That are your favorites?
Oh, not really.
What?
No.
Oh, all right. Can you tell me where and when were you born?
Oh, I was born in The Hague, Holland. And I was born on March the 15th, 1916.
Now, how do you account for the Spanish spelling of your name?
Oh, well, I had a grandmother. I'm called after my father's mother, who was of Spanish descent. That's my father, that's my grandfather, and that's his mother. And she's the lady I was called after.
She looks very Spanish, doesn't she?
Yeah, I never knew her. She died when my father was 8, 9 years old, shortly after that, for that matter. But, yeah, so that's how. Now, if I had been a boy, my name would have been Edouard Jean-Pierre, because my mother's father was French. So you see, but and I don't mean French Canadian. You know, he was from the south of France, and unfortunately, I didn't know him either. He died when my mother was 7 years old. So I think they both died of tuberculosis. You know, in those days, why. You had consumption. Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah. Consumption.
Where and when was Ed born?
Oh, he was born in 1903, and he was born in Vancouver. He pointed out the building to me once when we were going down, and this was years ago, down Main Street, and it was an old junkyard and a Jewish junkyard, and he said, see that little house up there? I was born upstairs in there. His father had 3 acres in False Creek. Oh, and in those days, it was False Creek, because he said to reach their house, you had to, in the season, go on a plank sidewalk, you know, to go over the, where the water came
flooded,
underneath. Yeah. That was
what month and day? Oh,
he was October the 26th. So that, no, he was about 12 years older than I was.
And how did you meet?
It was I had a boyfriend. He introduced me to Ed, and then it wasn't love at first sight, you know, nothing like that. No.
When did you come to Canada, Francesca?
To Canada?
Yeah.
Oh, I was 9 years old, so it'd be about 1923, 24, somewhere like that, and. And my father was, he was here 2 years ahead of me. In those days, you know, when you wanted to settle into Canada, they were short of farmers, and he was not a farmer. But you had to spend 2 years on a farm as a farm hand, and he did that, and then we followed out afterwards. And there was no flying in those days. You did it by boat, and we landed in Halifax.
Trained all across?
And this was in March. Yeah, towards the end of March. No, February, right. And you got on the train, and they had these seats that pulled out and then pulled out at the top, very old, and you cooked at a stove at the end of it there, and it took us 4 days to get to Winnipeg. And we saw these silly people, and snow all over the place, and we left when daffodils were already coming out. And there's snow all over the place, and you come to a station, and you know there'd be a lot of these people standing there, and they had the funniest fish nets. I mean, they were like that, and then they were like that, and there was a sort of net in between there, and we couldn't figure out how they fished anything like that. And they were snowshoes, and we'd never seen a snowshoe in our life before. So that, but then when my dad was at the station to meet us when we came, and I'm the oldest one. I have 2 younger sisters. I was 9, the other one was 5, and then the other one was, heavens, barely 2. However, after that, I still skated outside, and I was quite a sensation at that time, because you see, we didn't have in Holland these boot skates. Mine were wooden, and it had the blade, had a single blade, but they were wood, and then you tied them on your shoe. And they had never seen them before. Well, I had never seen theirs either. So, and not only that, this was in Winnipeg, and they had outdoor skating rinks, and it was just empty lots. And then they'd get a man that was out of work or something, or the neighborhood men, and they'd flood the whole thing, which was even, and they put boards all the way around it, and they were big lots too. And then they had an old shack with a stove in it. And
they still do.
They still do?
Yeah.
Oh, are you from Winnipeg?
No, I'm from Montreal.
Montreal, but well, that's how it was there. And
now, why did you decide, obviously you and Ed some time ago discussed the future of this place. Why did you decide to give it to the municipality?
Well, we discussed it thoroughly, and we had no children to leave the place to, and we had looked around. I mean, you've seen it. Since then, I have enlarged it, but we loved it. We had created it, and the people that came, I mean, we never asked a tour group to come, but it was by word of mouth, you see, and they came, and they seemed to enjoy it too. So we thought it would be nice to leave it to the municipality as a park forever. And that's what we did. That's why we did it.
Fabulous.
And I could subdivide it because it's suburban residential, and then everything would be flattened. And neither of us liked that. This was the love of our life, I guess. Between the two of us and this, why, that was it.
Yeah, your creation.
Yes. It was, people said, all that work, and we never considered it work. Well, I mean, we killed ourselves sometimes, but we were doing what we wanted to do. And you know, that way you live in the future. And my dad died when he was 96, and he died in the Baptist rest home here. And I'd visit him, and there'd be all these old people sitting there doing nothing. And they're all living in the past because they had no future. Now, why didn't they have a future? I mean, you've got to have an interest in your life. And if you haven't that, well, you might as well be dead. And that's the way we looked at it. Towards the end of his life, towards the last year in his life, Ed wanted to die desperately because there was nothing for him. He couldn't go out into his garden. He couldn't walk anymore.
I can completely understand
He
that.
couldn't read. He couldn't hear the television, even if he wanted to. There was nothing there anymore, you see. So he just sat in that chair there, and that was not for him. That was terrible. Besides, he had the arthritis in his knee, and the last 6 months of his life, what is it you can call him when he's on a tube? There was a special name here. I've already forgotten it because I had to change it for him. Put a nice tube on and put a day tube on, and put on his clothes and everything. You see. That wasn't for him.
No.
And I didn't have the nerve to help him die. You know, you read about this stuff in the paper, and you know, and I knew he'd be far happier dead. But I couldn't. I couldn't. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's
It's
all right.
just you find things in yourself that you never before knew you had, because now you read about Sue Rodriguez, how she wanted to die, and no one. Well, the doctor finally did, and you read about it, and you put yourself into that situation. Could you do it yourself? Could you? And you don't. One of my seedling cotoneasters, you know, when you talk about cotoneasters to people, they say, oh, cotoneasters. But there are so many different kinds that I had the fortune to get a catalog with a lot of species seed, and this is the result of one of them. It's been there now for 20 years, and it has now grown gracefully, climbing over the rhododendron. The berries are smaller than the usual kind, but very bright, and the birds leave it alone for a long time. But later on, when there's little else, they come in and horn in on there, and I have robins and heaven knows what. Not being a bird person, I don't really know. I just love them. This plant was also grown from seed, not by me this time, although I have done it in the past. It is evergreen, and what you see is stems which will form into racemes in the early spring, which are, 2 feet high sometimes and 6 inches or more wide. They are composed of yellow flowers, both on the inside and the outside, and they stay on the plant for months. In fact, even when it is in seed, I find it attractive, and I hate to cut them back, but eventually you have to, and especially when the new growth, which comes right from the base, is getting about a foot or so long, and you say, gee, I've got to do something. So you cut all the old stuff down, wonderful for the compost pile, and then you just wait for the rest of the stems to get to their full beauty for the winter, and then in the spring again you have that wonderful context of yellow. It's both hardy, and you can grow it in either sun or shade. It doesn't matter too much about the soil. I've had it growing in different situations. I don't think it would like wet feet, but otherwise there's no problem with it. That's Euphorbia wolfenii. Mahonias are one of our native shrubs. That would be Mahonia aquifolium. This is a hybrid called Charity, and it blooms earlier. It starts in November, as it is now, and goes on until spring. Its one fault is that it is not as hardy as the aquifolium, our native one, is, but growing the flowers in as early as November and December is worth growing it. As you see, the plant, did I mention that it's called Mahonia Charity? Great. You can have it
not at every nursery, but it is available. And it blooms, well, for 2 months anyway, as you can see, with new racemes coming all over the plant. Now, I have had it killed back by a hard frost. It came right up from the roots again. That only happened once. Now, your flowers are going to be damaged with frosts that are not as hard as a real damaging one, but it's worth it. Everything is not love and kisses in the garden, as I'll show you. This is Pinus sylvestris fastigiata, and the fastigiata, of course, is a form that goes very narrow but very high. The damage has been done by a buck deer in the fall. He's got velvet on his antlers, and I suppose it itches. I've never been able to ask him, but you can see where he has taken the bark right to the base. The short branches, as a matter of fact, I've already used to throw around plants that perhaps need a little protection in the wintertime. But this, I hope, will fill in with my fingers crossed. It was so gorgeous having these short branches going all the way up, and now look at it. As I said, it's not all love and kisses. This is called Misplis germanica, and anciently called a medlar. It is a fruit that was used, well, very seriously in the Middle Ages. In medieval times, after the fruit had dropped and it had got soft and mushy, it was called bletting, which is quite an ancient word in itself. It then was made into a jelly, and I have not tried the jelly, but I have tried the fruit, and it's a big blah. I wouldn't recommend using the fruit off this tree, but it has white flowers, single white flowers that are about 2 inches in diameter, and it looks beautiful in the spring, and it looks fascinating in the fall. This tree, oh, it would be 40 years old anyway, and it has such gorgeous structure in my eyes that we have only pruned it occasionally and left it right in the middle of the path, which unfortunately perhaps the tree should not have been planted that way, but well, one thing led to the other, and I think it is an added addition to the garden. Thank you.